So everybody, we have been joined by our buddy James, our historical editor, to have a chat about Tunisia. James, I'm pretty damn sure you're going to know a lot about Tunisia. John, yourself, how's the knowledge base looking?
Well, we're going to be looking at the American contribution to the Tunisian campaign, and this is, as a very quick outline, this is where the American army really got its baptism of fire. This is where they started to learn that everything they learned and trained for in pre-war years became essentially entirely useless. They had to rewrite the entire book, but they had people like Patton and Eisenhower in the background pretty much saying, we called this, we knew this was going to happen. Your two best generals telling you this might not work so well.
This gives us the setting for the Patton movie at the very beginning, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. Most of Patton's biggest successes were in the African, and I believe these in Sicily and Italy as well. Or was it, did he go on to Italy, James? I can't remember. He was off the line after Sicily. Yeah, he was off the line after Sicily. But this is where the American army really found its feet. Was able to say, right, the cavalry tactics we put together before the war aren't working. Tanks don't work well when they're in a big line abreast charging at the Germans, which have 88s. So we need to rework our thinking and strategies a bit.
Okay.
And as I'm going to go a little bit of a tangent, I do apologize.
No, it's fine. I like tangents. They're fun.
Yeah, they're you can see that rethinking of stuff coming out in the wartime training videos that the Americans put out. There's a great YouTube channel called Mastimus. He goes through a lot of old-time training videos from the British Army in the 60s, but he also does a lot of World War II stuff. I think you showed me this. Yeah, and he's showing tank platoon tactics after they learned the Tunisian campaign stuff.
I see.
And it's all really interesting because you can see in the video they're going, when you're on a road, do not hit dust. Do not leave the road surface. You will kick up more dust that way. If you're driving line abreast, stagger your formation, spread it out further. If you've got more than one tank, do not drive in a line on dust and all this sort of stuff.
Okay.
There's really simple stuff that the American army initially got wrong.
Okay.
Because they were thinking mass cavalry charge like the olden days.
Yeah.
But doing it with tanks. And
line them up, wall of steel going forward.
Yeah. And the Germans were prepared for that. They had 88s and they had high velocity anti-tank guns, and they just looked at it and went, this is a firing range.
Okay. So, James, I assume this is going to be another article series from yourself, and anybody helping you along on this one?
No, this one's a solo mission.
Okay. And what's the plan for the series then?
Okay, so like you were saying, it's another article series. Baptism of Fire, the Americans in Tunisia, 1943. We're at the 75th anniversary for this part of the North Africa campaign, which is really kind of the end of the North Africa campaign. North Africa has been going on between the Italians and the British, and then the British and the Germans, and then now the Americans come in, the Free French, the Vichy French come in into 1943. So it's been going on for quite some time. And we're finally now coming at the very end of it. And like John was saying before, this is America's the American Army's first really getting stuck into the war. It's their first big ground battle against the primary enemy, the Germans, in a big way. There's been some action before this for the Americans. Of course, we're fighting the U-boats in the Atlantic. There's been a lot of fighting in the Pacific. But this is the first time American divisions and corps got mixed up with German divisions and corps in a really big way. And the Americans kind of got their heads handed to them for a while in a really, really nasty way. Nowadays we call them, the ultimate noobs.
That's an insult right there. Wow.
Oh, well, a lot of this goes back to last year when I wrote, the Saratoga campaign. That was 5 weeks of America, kicking the crap out of the UK for a month and a half. And Warren was like, okay, that was great, but your next two articles have to be about America, coming up short. So hence the Vietnam series, and now we're doing, Tunisia. There's a couple of engagements in Tunisia against some of the German commanders there. And the Americans really do badly. There's Sidi Bouzid, which was an absolute massacre. And then the Germans attacked at Sidi Bouzid, kicked the crap out of the American 1st Armored Division, parts of the American 1st Armored Division. And then the next day come these counterattacks that John's talking about, where American Shermans line up in these perfect wedges. It's like something you see out of a video game. Nice, flat, open ground, and they're just driving straight towards 10th and 21st Panzer. And yeah, there's 75s, there's 88s. Kampfgruppe Ryman even has a detachment of about 5 Tigers, and they're hull down, and they just see these huge dust clouds coming straight at them, and it's like, oh wow, how much ammo do we have again? And yeah, that's pretty much the end of that. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre is kind of, an apt description for that. Of course, then the Americans pull back. They shuffle their commanders around a little bit. Patton gets brought in for the first time. We talk a little bit about his contribution and how big it was and kind of how big it wasn't in some places. And so to wrap it up in a little bit of a box, what you guys were talking about a second ago. We're wargaming through the first act of the movie Patton. If you put Patton in the DVD player and you hit go, the credits come up over these fields of American bodies and wrecked American equipment and local civilians like looting through the American vehicles and stuff like that. That's the aftermath of Kesselring Pass and Sidi Bouzid. And then comes a little bit of a redemption at El Guitar, and that wraps up the series.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the first parts of the series, each part, where are you going to be focusing on, and how many parts are you thinking for doing for the series?
It's going to be 4 parts. The first part is the usual introduction. Part 2 is Sidi Bouzid. It's the first big German counterattack against elements of U.S. Second Corps. It's kind of the front part of U.S. First Armored Division. That's, like I was saying a second ago, that's the first big German counterattack. The Americans kind of fall back from what they call, I won't get too much into the topography here, the Americans fall back from what they call the Eastern Dorsal through some of the low ground into the Western Dorsal. It's another mountain chain. We'll look at the map in a second that goes into that. That's the Battle of Kesselring Pass. That's part 3. And then we look into how the Americans kind of apply some of the lessons that they've learned. Lieutenant Colonel Hightower was one of the battalion commanders at Sidi Bouzid. He's the guy. I actually have his reports, these terrible old PDFs from of typed up documents from 1943 that are talking almost exactly about what John was mentioning before about the dust clouds. Don't drive your tanks very fast over open ground. You're going to kick up all this dust. It's going to take you a little longer to get where you're going, but you're not going to announce to everyone on the continent that you're on your way.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Colonel Hightower is the guy who wrote a lot of that initially. These lessons get applied, and then we do El Guitar in part 4.
Cool. John, any questions from yourself?
Not so much questions, but I want to briefly tap on the baptism of fire thing. Okay. Because a lot of people look at World War II and see Kasserine and stuff like that and go, that was just terrible for the Americans, and they have there's so much sympathy towards the American army and stuff, and saying, they just didn't understand what was going on. But at the same time, barely a year before, or just over a year before, the British and the French got the exact same treatment from the Germans. Yeah. And I think the British learned quicker in the desert because they had less support in the desert. Like when it comes to Normandy and stuff, everybody was doing everything. Everybody was together, kinda, fighting for the same goal. Yeah. But in the desert, the British learned what the Germans could do from the French campaign. Yeah. And they started to realize, hang on a minute. Yeah. This is how we need to behave with this army.
A bit quicker off the mark.
They already knew Rommel. That was their biggest thing, because they'd met him in France. Yeah. And he had torn them a new one, completely tore them apart. Yeah. And then when it came to the desert campaign, the British went, now we know who we're facing, now we know what we're up against. Yeah. They had a better idea of the equipment that was being used against them, the tactics being used against them. Yeah. And the Americans were essentially just the next line in, and they had to learn everything on top of that, because sometimes armies don't communicate very well. Countries don't communicate very well.
No, really? Really?
Well, the British tried.
Yeah,
the British
always tried.
It took the British about 12 to 18 months to really take the lessons from Rommel and the Africa Corps in North Africa. If you go from Rommel's first offensive beginning in April and May of 41 through the end of Operation Crusader. Okay, so maybe that was an exaggeration, but about 12 months. Yeah. Until then, they kept making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Rommel will go forward. He'll hit you with his Mark IIIs, maybe a handful of Mark IVs. He didn't have that many Mark IVs. Yeah. He'll slap you around a little bit, and then he'll do this feigned retreat. And then the Crusaders chase after him. The Crusader tanks chase after him like you should never do.
Yeah.
And you wind up getting, gored on this line of 88s that he has on the reverse slope. Don't ever do that. It took the British about a year to learn not to do this.
Yeah.
The Americans come in. We're gonna wrap this mess up because you Europeans, you're at it again. We just got done fixing this. They come in with that kind of attitude, we're gonna slap these Germans around. We're gonna fix this, and the British are like, okay, look, here's some of the things that Rommel likes to do. He likes to do this. Relax, there, okay, Mr. British. Okay, we got this. And then they made all the exact same mistakes. They did this in the convoys in the Atlantic. They did this in the desert. They did this.
Yeah.
Now, to the Americans' credit, and we get into this in part 4. The Americans do learn awfully fast. They do have the benefit of French and British experience once they finally learn to listen once in a while, 2 ears, one mouth kind of thing. And so we did learn, I was there, the Americans did learn actually pretty quickly. Rommel is on record, he just write this down, as at Kesselring Pass and Sidi Bouzid and Sabiba and some of the other battles he fought, I've never seen troops more badly prepared for battle. I've never seen troops learn this quickly.
Yeah.
By March 23rd at El Qatar, the Americans have really turned it around. They're not perfect. El Qatar is not like it happened in the movie Patton. It's not that much of a smashing Patton wins all the time kind of a victory. Patton wasn't even there in the movie. So we'll fix that. Yeah, that whole scene is a complete train wreck. But it was the Americans really getting their feet and really starting to learn a little bit near the end.
Okay, well, let's talk quickly about the game systems that you're going to use during the article series, because I know you're a huge fan of, I believe it's the Battlefront system, is it? Or Battle
Group Group by Iron Fist Publishing.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect timing. Battle Group is, or I should say Iron Fist Publishing is coming out with another supplement book for their superlative Battle Group system, and that's Battle Group Torch. I've been talking to Pierce Brand from Iron Fist Publishing about Battle Group, and he says, do you want a preview for Battle Group Torch that's coming out? I'm like, I'm writing an article series about not so much Torch, but the operations in Tunisia that take place immediately after that. Battle Group Torch is kind of a sequel to Battle Group Tobruk. Battle Group Tobruk was like the first half of the African Desert War. This one's going to go from El Alamein, where we left off at the Flames of War 4th Edition boot camp, all the way through to the end in Tunisia. So last I've heard, it's up for pre-orders in March. I've gotten some preview PDFs.
Yeah.
I've been using these lists and the information in these books to actually run the games that are featured in the article series. Tons of great features for these specific campaigns in the later part of the Desert War. He breaks out the Germans into 2 army lists. There's like pre-Alamein, post-Alamein. And it's not only because the Germans lost so much at El Alamein, but then when they fell back into Tunisia, they got this massive reinforcement package in the form of Hans-Jürgen von Arnim's 5th Panzer Army was shipped in from Italy and Sicily. And when you lose so much of your initial force and you get a huge influx of a new force, the overall chemistry of your army is going to change. And this kind of stuff is borne out in the Battle Group Torch lists, the special rules, all that stuff. And of course, we'll also be using Panzer Leader. Brian Train came out with his own expansion for Panzer Leader in 2000 called Desert Leader, in which he mentions specifically battles like Kesselring Pass, also the British battles that are taking place around in Tunisia to support the Americans. So we kind of took some of our games, based them on Brian Train's Desert Leader 2000 writings, expanded on them, and we're presenting them again in this series. That's like the big command tactical games. Each platoon, each piece is a platoon of tanks, so 50 men, or 5 tanks, a battery of 4 to 6 guns. That's per counter, and you've got upwards of who knows, maybe 100, 120 counters on the map. So you're doing a full regiment, brigade. If you're ambitious, the front end of a division. Your map table is several miles on a side. this is where you get the real scale of these battles. Miniature gaming always is going to compress it to an unrealistic degree. If realism and tactical fidelity is your goal, these are the kind of games that you want to get into. So we do provide a sample to do game systems that we're using in this, excuse me, in this series.
Very cool.
Yeah. So let's move on and talk about some equipment, because equipment is my thing. And
all right, Mr. Treadhead.
And the North African campaign particularly is where you see a lot of the big staples come out of the garages. You see the Sherman coming out, which is such a beautiful vehicle. But you see the Germans using the Mark IV specials. They have the first long barrel 75 guns coming out at that point. And
in 43, are we seeing Tiger yet, or are we still just a hair too early?
Oh yeah, Tiger's there.
Oh, she's there?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where 131 was captured in the Tunisian campaign.
I see.
The Americans got one first, but they couldn't tow it away, so they blew it up. I've seen the pictures of it. I have never seen so many blocks of C4 sitting underneath a Tiger in my life.
Wait, they took pictures before they hit the button?
Oh yeah, because I think it made it into Time magazine or something like that.
Okay,
like,
that I have to see.
It was like To Catch a Tiger or something, and there was a bunch of American engineers.
Yeah.
American. Just blow it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, trust me, it's better than the French decommissioning method. Let's take a plasma cutter and just cut it into four.
Cut it into four, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Whenever I see vehicles from France being sold, and it's just like, we are now selling the back quarter of a Tiger.
Yeah.
Where's the rest of it?
You know how rare and expensive a Tiger or King Tiger is in a private collection when one of the biggest millionaires in the hobby turns around and goes, "Oh, I managed to buy a quarter of a King Tiger." It's like, well, which quarter? Oh, the back left.
Never heard of that. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the equipment then.
Yeah.
Sherman has basically just come out. I think they're starting to get rid of the Lees, and the Brits are still with the Grants at this point, but they're starting to
I was kind of surprised at how few Lees there were. I thought this was going to be like, Campaign of the Lees. There was like only one regiment. Actually, not even one battalion of Americans that were still using the Lee.
Yeah.
2nd Battalion of the 13th. The crazy thing is that they took so many losses at battles like Sidi Bouzid and Kasserine that they lost so many Shermans. The American Army kind of goes through a bit of a downgrade. The Americans, their equipment is so bad because we've given it all away. Our Lend-Lease, we don't have any tank destroyers. Our Lend-Lease, our post-Lend-Lease tank destroyers are a 37mm anti-tank gun bolted to the back of a pickup truck. This is the M6 Fargo. Where's the arsenal of democracy? We've given it away to the British and the Russians, and we've left nothing for ourselves. So I'm sorry, but this is where the American equipment problems start to come in a little bit.
But it's not so much the quality of the equipment; it's just the numbers of it.
Yeah,
I think Sherman was the best tank the Americans could put together in the length of time it took them to put it together.
Yeah, but it had that nice design philosophy of, it's not the Tiger, it's not this beautifully engineered thing that is just totally amazing. This one machine will do it all. It was good enough whenever they made the Sherman. And that was the point.
Yeah, it's essentially the Model T Ford of armored warfare. It's there, and it eventually becomes horrendously abundant. So the only real problem you have with Shermans is getting enough people to crew them all the time when you start losing them.
Yes.
But onto the German side. Well, actually, with the tank destroyer idea, did the Americans still use the half track with the 75 on it?
We had, it's kind of funny. There's literally a step up in these articles. Part 1, or I should say part 2, when we do the first big battle at Sidi Bouzid, we have the M6 Fargo.
Yep.
It's a 37mm gun. It's like a door knocker,
Yep.
Bolted to the back, importee version, kind of pointing off the back of like it's a big Jeep. It's not even really like a 6-wheeled truck.
Yeah, it's one of the Dolphins.
Take a grenade launcher, bolt it to the back of an SUV, and that's an American tank destroyer.
Yeah.
Battle 2, we see the 75 on the half track. That's the M3 GMC, gun motor carriage. And then finally at El Qatar, the real heroes of that battle are 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion with the M10s.
Yep.
It's one of the first units to actually use the M10 in a big way in actual combat. It's the M10 with the long-barreled 76, and that's probably the first time you see like an actual American tank destroyer. Still doesn't have a roof. It still has all these other problems. but it's fast. It's got a very hard-hitting gun, thinly armored, but again, this is what a tank destroyer was in those days.
Yeah, exactly. But moving on to the German side of things.
Yes.
Like I said, they had the Panzer IV, the later models with the long 75s coming in.
Yes.
You had the Panzer III L, the L models that had the long barrel 50s.
Yeah.
And then you had all the anti-tank stuff. You had the 88s, which of course have been a staple since the French campaign.
Yeah.
You have I believe the Pak 40s were starting
Were
to
they
become...
rolling out at that point?
I think they were starting to become common at that point.
Oh yeah, the Pak 40s are the 7.5 centimeters, I believe.
Yeah.
So yep.
Then you had the Germans becoming a little bit crazy and Tiger starting to make an appearance as well. And of course, when Tiger turns up, there was what a lot of historians call was Tiger fright.
Yes.
Or, you know, it was this tank suddenly appeared that no one could figure out what the hell it was.
Yeah, this is a huge behemoth that we can't hit on the front.
Yeah. But it's strange, and it still echoes through history that when something bad happens, 3 months later you find out, oh, we already knew about it. The Brits knew about Tiger development.
Right.
They'd passed it on to, I think they passed it on to the Russians, and they passed it on to the Americans. But everyone was saying, it doesn't matter, it's not going to be a big problem, they'll be there in small numbers. And yeah, the Tiger does turn up to Tunisia in small numbers, but at the same time, those small numbers really play. And the Tiger really has nothing to fear in the Tunisian desert.
Well, I mean, if you throw it down into a larger group of smaller panzers, there's just a big anchor, essentially a rolling fortress that, even though the enemy might be taking everybody else out if they get a lucky shot in, you know, this thing's just going to roll forward anyway, and it's just like, okay, we're killing everything else, but that thing is big, it is scary, you can't kill it, what are we going to do?
Yeah, and you always hear stories about, from the American and the British tank crews at the time, is that they knew when an 88 fired, or they knew when a Tiger fired, because it had such a different noise to everything else. Everything else was like a zip or a quite a high whine. Yeah. But when an 88 went past, it sounded like tearing paper. It was a really low, droning, tearing paper sound as it went past.
Yeah, I think haven't we seen? I think there's a video on YouTube of someone firing an 88, and you hear
the big crack, the big report off the gun, and that woof, as it goes away, and you're like, that's
scary.
That has to be something that must have been terrifying to any tank crew if they heard it, if they were lucky enough to hear it.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to some of the myths surrounding this particular era of the war. So I know you guys want to actually talk about this a little bit because there are a few out there. So James, do you have any in mind that you were wanting to talk about?
Yeah, we already covered some of them, incidentally. We talked about the American use of the Lee. Yep. At least that maybe that was like a person, but that was a misconception of mine. I thought there was going to be a lot more Lees here. But it's actually mostly Shermans. There are some Lees at Kesselring Pass. Because it's going to come up, so I figured I would address it in the article series and in the interview. The movie Patton and how he's represented at the Battle of El Guitar. He was and wasn't at El Guitar. It definitely did not happen the way it did in the movie, and we'll probably get more into that in detail. El Guitar kind of takes place in two halves in two different places. There were two ways the Germans could have approached in that counterattack. Patton, to his credit, does have both approaches covered, but he's pretty sure it's going to be to the north. So he has like 60% of his stuff to the north, and he personally is at the north, ready to, look through the binoculars and, misquote Rommel's book that she didn't write and so on and so forth. And he's ready to go up there. It turns out the Germans were attacking in the south. And it's a big armored attack against just a couple of infantry battalions from 1st Infantry Division, Big Red 1. And that's where the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion comes in with one of the first big battlefield uses of the M10. Patton hears that the battle's going on in the south where he's not, gets in his command card, has himself driven down to the south. By the time he gets down there, the battle's pretty much over. The Germans do reform and try again later in the afternoon, so he is technically there. It just doesn't happen anything like it does in the movie. Normally, I don't make a big deal about the movie, but that movie, Patton, is so huge. It was such a great movie. People ask me, was Patton really that good? Well, Patton was definitely a good general. He wasn't our best general. He wasn't one of our best generals. George C. Scott was one of our best actors, and there's the rub. One of Patton's son-in-laws gets captured in one of these battles. He gets to write home to his daughter and say, "Look, I got some bad news for you about your husband. He's not coming home right away."
So that
For all the
didn't
talk
happen.
we hear about Rommel and Patton, Patton and Montgomery having this rivalry,
Yeah.
they didn't really know each other at the time.
Yeah.
Montgomery was a commander at this level, and Patton was way down here. So if it was a rivalry at that time, it's a rivalry in Patton's own mind a little bit.
Yeah.
That does change a little bit in Sicily later on. The real rival here is Rommel and von Arnim. These two guys hated each other like Patton and Montgomery never would. And these are the two big German commanders in Tunisia at the time, and their problems, their interpersonal conflict is going to be a big problem, or it's going to be a big reason why some of these battles turn out the way they do, because they can't get themselves organized.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that in more detail in the actual series.
Cool.
Yeah. So let's do a little sort of Q&A takeaway thing here. So we'll talk. Yeah, we'll talk about.
Let's wrap up on that.
Yeah, let's wrap up. So what we're basically going to be discovering in these article series is this whole baptism of fire for the American Army. It becomes this proving ground where it's probably the best proving ground for an army ever.
Right.
Because it's just desert. The civilian population is tiny. It has plenty of room for the armies to actually get out and maneuver on divisional level and corps level. So it lets everybody get training from your buck private right up to your general, and everybody gets a sense of how this army is behaving and how this army is actually going to be effective.
You have to find out which generals are worth a damn and pluck out the bad ones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
that definitely happens.
And you hear that a lot from the likes of Bradley when he's talking after the war about how the Tunisian campaign went and stuff. And even his reports just after Kasserine, where he's saying stuff like, how are we expected to fight an army when our soldiers don't realize that they're supposed to be fighting? It's something along those lines. It's like, our men just don't have the stomach for it. They don't have the training, so they don't know what they're doing when they're out in the field.
So would this have led to a lot of the modernization in tactics for the forces out there?
It absolutely did. It also instilled the command structure of the American Army with a sense of, your men have to understand their job. There's no more of what the British used to do at the start of the Desert Campaign, where it was only the commanders knew the plan. That had to be eliminated, because you're working on such a vast scale that everybody from your senior NCOs up have to know the plan. And they have to understand their part in it, or their regiment's part in it.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, it becomes uncoordinated, and if one regiment gets pushed too hard, it can break and fall, which could then cause the whole line to
leave
collapse.
gaps in the lines just to roll up the sides.
So that's where
you have to know your job, and you have to know your boss's job. Is kind of what the Germans what the Germans started at the very beginning of the war, and pretty much everybody else kind of learned this lesson. Because like you were saying, you're doing it at such a vast scale, and you're doing it at such a speed. That the flexibility has to be there. And if you don't know your boss's job, or even your boss's job, and some of these people start getting hit, or you lose radio communications, or you get out of contact, you have to be able to pick up that mission and carry it the rest of the way home.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a really, really interesting series, James. I'm really looking forward to seeing how some of the actual gameplay mechanics are going to work. If you're interested in seeing maybe a preview for the new battle group stuff, definitely check it out, because as James has said, he's got some early PDFs in there for some games and some army lists, so that's going to be very cool to see. Other than that, everybody, tell you what, get your comments in below. Tell us, are you excited for this article series from James? And, well, we'll move on. See you again soon.